the one-on-one college mock trial national championship. This tournament is hosted by the UCLA School of Law and the Drexel Klein School of Law. We love partnering with our friends cross country in Philadelphia. I also want to particularly thank Professor Abbie Heller, who helped me put this tournament on and who has been thanking everybody else this weekend and deserves a round of thanks herself. I'm thrilled to introduce everybody you see on screen. So I'm going to ask our attorneys, our counsel for the round, to turn off their videos for just a second so we can focus on our judges. Ms. Shepard, I'll introduce you in a moment. You can turn off your video as well. This year's judging panel is, without exaggeration, the best judging panel I've ever seen in a mock trial. We have on screen now, everybody you're looking at, except for me, has won an AMTA national championship. All 13 of these folks have won an AMTA national championship. They've won it as an attorney, and all 13 gave the closing argument in the final round. I'm thrilled to introduce the 2002-2003 national champion from the University of Iowa, Travis McGivern. Travis, you want to say hello?
Hi.
Thrilled to introduce the 2004-2005 national champion from UCLA, Bryan Caforio.
Hello, everybody.
Also from that UCLA team, Bryan closed one year and Amanda closed the other. We're thrilled to welcome UCLA's national champion, Amanda Bonn.
Hello, good luck.
We have the 2007 national champion and 2006 national champion from University of Virginia, Danielle Young.
Hello, everyone.
The 2009 national championship closer, who popularized the question, I'm looking for a number, on cross-examination, Jonathan Hartsfield. If you think you're original, he started it. Jonathan, you want to say hello? We have the 2010 national champion from New York University. She closed in the final round. She was almost a witness in this final round. Amanda Tuminelli.
Hi, everyone.
The 2011 national champion from UCLA, Brandon Hughes.
Good afternoon, everyone. Congratulations.
The 2013 national champion from Florida State University, Shahier Rahman.
Hi, everybody. Good luck.
The 2014 national champion, also from UCLA, Iain Lampert.
Hello. Best of luck.
2015 national champion from Harvard University, Zach Fields.
Hey, guys. Excited to be here.
The 2016 national champion from Yale University, Danielle Stern.
Hey, guys. Good luck. Congrats.
The 2017 national champion from the University of Virginia, Allie Piacenti.
Hey, everyone. Good luck.
And our most recent national champion from Miami University, 2018, Danny Kunkel.
Hi, everyone. Good luck, ladies.
I'm going to ask our judges to turn off their video, and we'll bring you back on at the end of trial for comments. And I've got one more introduction. Can Audrey Shepard take the screen, please? Audrey is our bailiff this weekend. She's a rising junior at UCLA undergrad, a member of their mock trial team on their varsity team last year. She's also the youngest person ever to win the high school version of this competition, Gladiator. So she's going to be serving as our bailiff this round, helping make sure that our screen display is right. Audrey, thanks for your help all weekend.
Yeah, I'm just happy to be here.
All right, let's see if we can get our counsel on screen. Ms. Mehta, Ms. Gaskins. I think we're ready to go. All right, can I get appearances, please, starting with the government?
Yes, Your Honor. My name is Sonali Mehta, and I'm joined by my co-counsel, Mr. Seva Castleberry.
Good afternoon, Your Honor.
Good afternoon.
And Mr. Castleberry will be assisting me with the technology involved in today's trial as we represent the people of the United States of America.
Thank you. Ms. Gaskins?
Good afternoon, Your Honor. My name is Sydney Gaskins, and I'm joined here today by my co-counsel, Mr. Ethan Hudson.
Hello, Your Honor.
Hello.
Together, we're going to be representing the defendant in today's case, Ms. Kara Bassett.
Thank you. Are there any housekeeping matters? Oh, I'll let the defendant introduce herself. Go ahead, Ms. Bassett.
Good morning, Your Honor. Good afternoon.
Any housekeeping matters from the government?
Yes, Your Honor, just briefly. First of all, I think that screen sharing is not enabled on the Zoom call right now.
Let's see if we can fix that. I'm glad you said that. Let's see how to do that. Tell me if it works now.
Mr. Castleberry, check. Okay, I think we're good.
Thank you very much, counsel.
Your Honor, also because of the technology, we would just like to ask, for any reason, if you can't hear or see us due to the internet connection, just to interrupt and let us know.
Thank you.
Your Honor, we would also like to invoke Rule 615, calling for the constructive sequestration of all witnesses.
That's granted.
And finally, Your Honor, we did want to direct your attention to that pretrial order signed by Judge Foxstein, specifically to number 7, stating that exhibits 4 through 33 are pre-admitted and may be used at any time for any purpose. Your Honor, we understand there's been a last-minute change. Judge Foxstein changed her mind, and exhibit 4 is no longer pre-admitted, but 5 through 33 still are.
That's correct.
And with that, Your Honor, the government is ready to proceed to opening statements.
Thank you. Ms. Gaskins, anything further?
Yes, Your Honor, we just want to note that Ms. Bassett will be in court for the trial.
Thank you. And I'll inform our judges that given the unusual nature of the online trial, we had previously waived the requirement of identifying the defendant as part of the government's requirement for their case in chief. So consider that satisfied. Anything else, Ms. Gaskins?
No, Your Honor, we're ready to go.
Great. Ms. Mehta, whenever you're ready, we're all going to switch to speaker view for your opening statement.
May it please the court? She planned, she poisoned, she profited. In August of 2017, the defendant, a woman named Kara Bassett, was tired of fighting with her husband. See, her husband, Don Clark, was a wealthy businessman who owned multiple properties and businesses, including a zoo. Ms. Bassett wanted control over those properties, but her husband wouldn't give it to her. So she decided to take matters into her own hands. On the night of August 18th, 2017, the defendant crept up next to her husband, stabbed him with a needle, and injected him with a deadly poison. In seconds, Mr. Clark was dead, and the defendant had access to his entire fortune. Members of the jury, that's why we've charged the defendant with murder. It's our job to prove to you beyond a reasonable doubt that Ms. Bassett intentionally caused the death of Mr. Clark. Members of the jury, we're going to meet that burden today by showing you that the defendant planned for this crime. She poisoned her husband, and then she profited off of his death. I'm going to walk through each of those one at a time. First, you'll hear that the defendant planned for this crime. See, today you're going to see a very important legal document. That's Mr. Clark's power of attorney. This document explains that if Mr. Clark were to disappear, Ms. Bassett would gain control over all his properties, all his businesses, his entire $8 million fortune. With that plan set, you'll hear how the defendant knew she had to make her husband disappear. So she poisoned him. Today, you're going to learn about a deadly chemical that was kept on property at the Clark Zoo, where they both lived and worked. You'll hear that this chemical was so dangerous, so lethal that just a few drops could kill a human being. You'll learn that the defendant had access to a box filled with needles and syringes and this chemical. And when she was asked by the police if she knew how this chemical could be lethal to a human being, she just laughed. Finally, you'll learn what the defendant did to ensure she got her profit. See, members of the jury, the defendant knew if she got caught, she would lose everything, every last cent. So after poisoning her husband, she drove his body to a swamp, more than 100 miles away. And then she waited. You'll see that she didn't call the police. She didn't call her husband or text her husband for an entire week when she claimed her husband was missing. Members of the jury, that plan almost worked. See, the FBI was never able to recover Mr. Clark's body. But as you'll hear from Agent Steph Johnson when she takes the stand, the defendant left other evidence behind. Forensic evidence tying her to that swamp, phone records exposing her cover-up, and GPS evidence showing us exactly where she went on that night. Members of the jury, today the evidence will show the defendant planned for this crime. It'll show she poisoned her husband and that she walked away with a profit. Plan, poison, profit. Those are the reasons that Don Clark isn't here with us today. Those are the reasons that at the end of this trial, I'm going to come back up here and ask that you find Miss Bassett, guilty. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Mehta. Ms. Gaskins, you can proceed.
May it please the court. Plan, poison, profit. That's what Miss Mehta wants you to believe about Miss Bassett. You see, in her opening statement, she had a lot of claims, a lot of accusations about Miss Bassett. But here's the thing. She's not going to be able to prove a single one. And trust me, we'll get to that. But first, I want to take a moment to introduce you to Miss Bassett herself. And members of the jury, this is Kara Bassett. The evidence is going to show that for 7 years, she was married to Don Clark. And they had something really interesting in common. They both loved elephants. And together they ran an elephant zoo. But something tragic happened to the both of them about 3 years ago. Miss Bassett, she's alone in her house. She wakes up the next morning and she notices that her husband is missing. And members of the jury, what you're going to hear today, what you're going to find out is that nobody, not the government, not Miss Mehta, not the FBI, not the police, and certainly not Miss Bassett, have any idea what actually happened that night that Don Clark disappeared. You see, when you listen to the government's evidence, we're confident that you're actually going to have more questions than you have answers. So what I want to do is I want to ask you to focus on 3 simple questions, the things to look for throughout today's trial. Number 1, where is Don Clark? Can the government even prove that he's dead? Second, why didn't the government ever investigate any other possibilities, any other potential suspects? And third, where is the evidence in the first place that Miss Bassett planned and profited and was connected to her husband's disappearance? You see, when Miss Mehta walked into the courtroom today, she was the one who decided to accuse Miss Bassett of killing her own husband. I don't have to tell you that that's a serious allegation. It's not something to play about. And that is why the law requires them to prove it to you beyond a reasonable doubt. The highest burden in our criminal justice system. And she's not going to be able to meet her burden today. Because here's the one thing that you need to remember throughout the course of today's trial. One premise that explains this whole case. The government, they chose their answer. before they asked the questions. Now, as the defense, we don't have a burden, but we are going to call a witness to the stand. Joe Kuang is going to take the stand today and walk you through in depth all of the things that the FBI missed. First, Joe Kuang is a television producer. He's going to tell you that he has over 2,000 hours of video footage of Don Clark leading up to his disappearance. And that the FBI, they never even bothered to take a look at it. You're also going to hear that there were other alternative suspects in this case. People who reached out to Don Clark the same day that he disappeared. And the FBI, they never even bothered to look into it. And lastly, you're going to hear from Miss Bassett herself. She's going to take that stand today, look you in the eye, and tell you that she had nothing to do with Don Clark's disappearance. And that's why at the end of today's trial, I'm going to speak with you again. I'm going to walk through all of the ways that Miss Mehta and the government failed to meet their burden. How they couldn't prove that Miss Bassett planned this, how she profited from it, or any of that. Rather, we're going to talk about how the government, they chose their answer before they asked the questions. And remember, you have to presume that Miss Bassett is innocent from the beginning to the middle to the end. So when you have unanswered questions about what really happened to Don Clark, Miss Bassett is innocent. And I'm going to ask you to come to the only conclusion that's supported by the evidence. I'm going to ask you to find Miss Bassett not guilty of murder. Thank you.
Thank you, counsel. Ms. Mehta, are you prepared to call your first witness?
Yes, Your Honor. At this time, the government calls Agent Johnson to the stand.
We're going to presume that all witnesses are already sworn. Can we get Agent Johnson to turn on her video, please? Okay. So Ms. Gaskins and I are going to mute our video until there's an objection, or unless there's an objection. Ms. Mehta, you may proceed.
Agent, I'm going to be asking you some questions today. Can you see and hear me okay?
Yes, ma'am.
Now, could you start by introducing yourself to the members of the jury?
Of course. Good afternoon. My name is Senior Agent Steph Johnson.
What do you do for work, ma'am?
I work with the FBI in the Criminals Investigations Division, specifically in the Violent Crime Division.
Agent, were you involved in the investigation into the disappearance of Mr. Don Clark in 2017?
Yes, ma'am. I was actually the lead investigator and led the FBI team in charge of finding Mr. Clark.
And ma'am, what was the result of that investigation?
We eventually charged his wife, Kara Bassett, with murder for Don Clark.
Ma'am, did you charge and arrest Miss Bassett before you asked her questions?
Of course not, ma'am. This was about a year into the investigation. We spoke with Miss Bassett multiple times throughout the course of that investigation.
All right, ma'am. Now, I want to start at the beginning. When you spoke with Miss Bassett for the first time, what did she tell you happened to her husband?
That was on August 25th of 2017. Miss Bassett called and told us that her husband was gone when she woke up in the morning.
Well, Agent, I want to go ahead and create a timeline of events for the jury. Mr. Castleberry, could we get that on the screen? So, ma'am, when was the last time the defendant told you she saw her husband?
She said it was at 9:00 p.m. that evening.
What did she tell you she did on the night of August 18th?
She said that evening after she saw her husband, she went to sleep and didn't do anything until she awoke the next morning to discover him missing.
Well, ma'am, did you find any reason to doubt that story?
We did. Throughout our investigation, we were actually able to track the GPS coordinates of a vehicle that was on the property on August 18th that clearly left the property that day.
All right, Agent, I want to break down what that GPS data says. According to that data, when did that van leave the Clark's property?
The data said that the van left the property that evening at 11:17 p.m.
Where did the van go?
It drove about 140 miles east to the Big Gum Swamp in Florida.
And Agent, when did it arrive at that swamp?
At 1:26 a.m.
How long was the van stationary at the swamp?
The van was there until 2:10 a.m. when it departed to a local airport where it arrived at 4:29 a.m.
Ma'am, did you find any reason to suspect that the person driving this van was the defendant?
We did. Throughout the course of our investigation, we actually saw that there was some algae and mud on the inside driver's portion of the van. We were able to test that and send it to a forensic lab, as well as testing some items we found on the defendant herself, her home, comparing that to items we found at the Big Gum Swamp.
Agent, what was the result that your forensic team came to?
What the forensics report found was that there was a special and complicated mix of algae that came from Big Gum Swamp that was also on the defendant's boots when we tested it.
Ma'am, did you find that mud anywhere else, that same algae combination?
Yes, we also found that on the driver's pedal, brake, and on the floor of the driver's side of the car in the van.
All right, ma'am, now I want to talk about what happened after August 18th. Did the defendant call the police on August 19th?
She did not, ma'am.
Did she call the police on the 20th?
She did not.
When did she call the police?
The defendant called the police on August 25th of 2017.
What did she say she believed happened to her husband in that week's time?
Ma'am, she offered no explanation. All she told us was that she did not know his current location.
Well, did she tell you what she had been doing in that week's time?
She suggested that she had looked for her husband, but could not provide as much specifics to that search.
Ma'am, did you find any reason to doubt that story, that she was looking for her husband?
Yes, ma'am. We were able to look at the phone records of Miss Bassett as well as of her husband. We were able to conclude that during the week's time before she contacted the police, she had not made any attempts
to lack of foundation. May I be heard?
Yes.
The question as phrased that Ms. Mehta asked the witness was whether or not this witness is able to, I'm sorry, I need to move the exhibit over. Whether or not this witness is able to tell, objection withdrawn.
Okay, you can proceed.
Yes, Your Honor. So, Agent, you were testifying about what the defendant did in that week time before she called the police. You were telling us you reviewed her phone records. Do you know if she called her husband in that week?
During that week, she made no phone calls to her husband.
Did she make any text messages to her husband?
No, ma'am.
Did she call any of his family or friends trying to see where he was?
No, ma'am, she did not.
Now, Agent, I want to ask you if you found any evidence that the defendant in this case had a motive to commit this crime. Now, are you familiar with a power of attorney document?
Yes, ma'am. That is something we uncovered during our investigation.
Mr. Castleberry, would you put that document on the screen for us? Agent, could you explain to the jury just broadly what this is?
Of course, ma'am. The power of attorney document basically outlines what would happen to Mr. Clark's assets if he were to die. That was a specific clause we focused on for this investigation.
So according to this document, what happens to the assets if Mr. Clark disappears?
They would all go to his wife, Miss Bassett.
Ma'am, do you see what date this document was made? Could you read that for the jury?
Yes, ma'am. It was on May 1st of 2017.
And when is that in reference to when Mr. Clark went missing?
That's about 3 months prior.
Agent, we talked about what Miss Bassett did before and after her husband went missing. I want to go back to the day of. Did you find anything on the Clark's property to suggest that that could have been a murder weapon?
Yes, ma'am. There was actually a storage facility on site that was full of different medications, but most concerningly, there were several syringes full of poison.
Agent, would you be able to identify what these two documents are?
Yes, ma'am. The one on the left, Exhibit 18, is a photograph of the syringes filled with carfentanil. And then Exhibit 17 was a data sheet we found on site that went over the different scientific effects of this poison.
Well, do you know how dangerous or lethal this drug, carfentanil, can be for a human being?
Yes, it's incredibly toxic. It actually is 5,000 times more toxic than heroin.
Ma'am, did that zoo, did it keep any sort of record of how much of this drug was supposed to be on the property?
They did. Since carfentanil is a Schedule II drug, they are required by law to keep track of how and when this drug is used. We uncovered a log in that same storage facility.
According to the log, how much carfentanil should have been in the storage facility?
The log claimed that there should have been 24 syringes full of carfentanil at the time we searched.
Ma'am, how many did you find?
23.
And did you ask the defendant if she knew how lethal carfentanil could be on a human being?
Of course.
What did she say?
Well, ma'am, when we asked her that question, all she did was laugh.
Thank you, Agent, for your time today. Your Honor, I have nothing further right now.
Ms. Gaskins, you can proceed.
Cross-examination.
Okay.
Good afternoon, Agent Johnson.
Good afternoon.
I want to start by talking about your search for Don Clark. Is that okay?
Of course.
You started looking for him at his own property, right?
Yes, we began our search on August 25th.
You looked for signs of blood, didn't you?
Yes, any kind of sense or of struggle we looked for.
You looked for signs of violence at the property, right?
Yes, signs of struggle.
You didn't find any of that at the property, did you?
No, we did not, ma'am.
You then went to the swamp, right?
Yes, we were able to look at the Big Gum Swamp about a week after his disappearance.
You brought dogs with you, didn't you?
Of course.
There was no sign of Don Clark's body at that swamp, was there?
That's correct. Unfortunately, we were unable to recover his body, both at the swamp or anywhere else in our investigation.
Now, you don't have a forensic report proving he's dead, do you?
Well, we certainly can't without a body, ma'am.
You don't have an eyewitness to his death, do you?
No, none of our eyewitnesses were at the swamp that evening or had information about what happened there.
You don't have an autopsy, do you?
Again, ma'am, we can't have an autopsy without a body.
That's a no.
That's correct.
It's been 3 years and you still haven't been able to find Don Clark's body. Isn't that true?
That's correct, ma'am.
So let me ask you, Mr. Hudson, can you throw Exhibit 21 up on the screen for us? Agent Johnson, this is a call log that you reviewed in the course of your investigation, right?
Yes, specifically the call log for Mr. Clark.
I want to focus on the fourth call that he got. This call was made on August 18th, 2017, wasn't it?
Yes, looks like the call was made at 6 p.m. and lasted 52 minutes.
This call log indicates that Don Clark called somebody in Costa Rica, right?
That's correct.
Now, you knew that Don Clark had a property in Costa Rica. Isn't that true?
Yes, we were made aware that Mr. Clark had a vacation home.
This call lasted 52 minutes, didn't it?
Yes, ma'am.
And it says this call was at 6 o'clock in the evening, right?
Yes, ma'am.
That's just a couple hours before Don Clark allegedly disappeared. Isn't that true?
That's right.
Agent Johnson, let me ask you, you have no idea who that phone number belongs to, do you?
That's correct. We were unable to uncover who the phone number actually belonged to.
You have no idea who was calling the victim just hours before his disappearance, right?
From this specific number, that is correct.
This specific number also was texting Don Clark, right?
Yes, we uncovered that as well.
You don't have an alibi for this person, do you?
Well, we clearly don't know who this person is, so no, I do not have an alibi.
Now, I want to talk to you about somebody else who called Don Clark the day he disappeared. Mr. Hudson, can you go back to those calls for me? Don Clark had a call with Lisa Clark, right?
That's correct.
This call was also the day he disappeared, right?
Yes, at 2:37 p.m.
Call lasted 4 minutes, didn't it?
That's right.
Now you understand that Lisa Clark is Don Clark's ex-wife, right?
That is correct, ma'am.
You knew that she had threatened him in the past. Isn't that true?
We had heard inklings of that, specifically from the defendant herself.
Objection, Your Honor, hearsay?
Response?
We're not offering this for the truth of the matter. We're offering it for the effect on the investigation.
More specifically, the effect you think it ought to have had?
Yes.
Ms. Mehta?
Yes, Your Honor. In that case, I would amend my objection to Rule 404. This is improper character evidence, as they're using these past aggressive acts by Lisa Clark to suggest that she may have been the person who was violent towards Mr. Clark in the case we're talking about today. That's improper character evidence, Your Honor.
May I respond?
Yes.
We're not offering this evidence for propensity purposes. Rather, we're offering this evidence to prove an intent for Lisa Clark.
It's overruled.
Yes, Your Honor.
You knew that Lisa Clark had threatened Don Clark in the past, didn't you?
That is what Miss Bassett had told us, yes.
So of course, you tried to contact this person, right?
Yes, we did.
You called her up and said, hey, do you have any information about what happened to Don Clark, right?
Yes, we contacted Miss Clark and asked if we could conduct an interview, which unfortunately she rejected.
She refused to cooperate with your investigation, didn't she?
That's correct, ma'am. She did not speak with us at any length.
She's the only witness who refused to cooperate with your investigation. Isn't that a fact?
That's right.
You don't know if Lisa Clark has an alibi for Don Clark's disappearance. Isn't that true?
That's correct. We were never able to verify an alibi.
You also don't have alibis for some of the park employees, right?
That's correct. There were 2 park employees that were not able to give us an alibi. Granted, throughout the investigation, we found no reason to believe that they were involved in his disappearance.
Well, one of those park employees was Nate Garson, right?
Yes, that was one of them, ma'am.
You knew that Nate Garson had access to that carfentanil that you were talking about on direct examination, right?
That's correct. There were multiple park employees who had access to that storage facility.
And some of those park employees, you have no idea where they were when Don Clark disappeared. Yes or no?
It was just 2 park employees, ma'am.
That's a yes. You don't have alibis for them.
For those 2, that is correct.
Now, I want to ask you about that algae that you talked about on direct examination. You said that the algae was a match to a swamp called Big Gum Swamp. I heard you correctly, right?
The algae on Miss Bassett's boots, yes, was a match to the swamp.
Well, isn't it true that you didn't even test the property of Don Clark for that same type of algae?
That's correct. We did not uncover any samples of algae from the park.
So you don't even know if the algae on her boots could have matched algae present at her own park, right?
That's correct, ma'am. The forensic report only told us that the algae matched the swamp.
Now, Agent Johnson, I do want to talk to you about something else that's really important. Out of all the witnesses that you interviewed, none of them told you that Miss Bassett was ever violent with her husband the day he disappeared. Isn't that right?
On August 18th, yes, that's correct. We had no indication that there was a domestic dispute or any kind of violent harassment that day.
And no indication of an argument either?
That's correct, ma'am.
No indication that she was driving that van? No eyewitnesses to that, right?
Well, we did have indication that she drove the van, since the car itself had the same algae that was on her boots that was also at the swamp. So that's not quite correct, ma'am. There was indication that she was driving the van that day.
Well, Agent Johnson, I'm simply asking about eyewitnesses, and you don't have an eyewitness that saw Miss Bassett drive the van, do you?
That is correct, ma'am. Yes.
You don't have an eyewitness that saw her at the airport, do you?
That's correct.
You don't have an eyewitness that saw her going from the airport back home, do you?
That's correct. We had no eyewitnesses available at the airport at all.
As a matter of fact, Kara Bassett was completely cooperative with your entire investigation, wasn't she?
That's correct. We spoke with Miss Bassett a multitude of times throughout the course of the investigation.
You said a multitude of times. That was 12 times, wasn't it?
That's correct, ma'am.
Every time you talked to her, she cooperated with you.
Yes, ma'am. She spoke with us each time we asked.
She answered all the questions that you had, right?
That's correct.
Thank you. Nothing further.
Mehta, do you have any additional? Agent Johnson,
Yes, Your Honor. Brief redirect.
take whatever time you like.
Now, Agent, Ms. Gaskins just asked you some questions about someone in Costa Rica. Do you know if Mr. Clark owned a plane?
Yes, he did. It was actually at the airport where the van was uncovered.
So, ma'am, to be clear, what country did you find that plane in?
In the United States, ma'am.
Did you review any plane records as part of your investigation?
Yes. During our investigation, we spoke at the airport, looked for any kind of documentation to show that Mr. Clark had left the country, and we found nothing.
Thank you, Agent. Your Honor, I have nothing further.
Recrossed.
No recross, Your Honor.
Thank you very much, Agent Johnson. We appreciate your time. You may step down. Government.
Your Honor, we have no further witnesses. We rest our case in chief.
Would you like a 2-minute recess, or do you want to proceed to defense case? I'll ask each of you. Ms. Gaskins first.
Take a recess.
Great. And let's do that. We'll make it 2 minutes, and we'll get started again. Government, ready to proceed?
Yes, Your Honor.
Defense, ready to proceed?
Yes, Your Honor.
Please call your first witness.
At this time, we call Joe Kuang to the stand. Good afternoon. Could you please introduce yourself to the members of the jury?
Sure. Hi. My name is Joseph Kuang, but you can just call me Joe.
What do you do for a living?
I'm a producer. Mainly, I work on documentaries and things like that.
How'd you get involved in that line of work?
Well, so my parents were actors when I was growing up, but I've never really been, as comfortable in front of the camera. So when I got out of school, I decided to work on the other side. I applied for every intern job I could. Then I worked from intern to writer, and writer to producer.
What types of things do you produce?
Like I said, it's documentaries. I work with people who want to hire me to provide footage of what they're working on and spread their message.
How did you get involved in this case?
Well, I was actually hired by Miss Bassett to film a documentary about her elephant park.
Could you tell us more about that elephant park?
Absolutely. It's essentially a zoo specifically for elephants that Miss Bassett owned with her husband, someone named Don Clark.
What were your roles and responsibilities working at that park?
Well, my job was basically to film everything, honestly. I would film Kara with the elephants, Kara with the employees, Kara and her husband. We even had some individual interviews with Kara, too.
How long did you work with them?
By the end, it was probably about 3 years.
Would you say you got to know them pretty well?
Absolutely, yeah. I was there, 5 days a week for all 3 of those years, so I'd say I know them pretty well.
How would you describe Kara and Don's relationship?
I mean, from what I saw while I was there, it seemed pretty affectionate. They would fight sometimes, but a lot of times I saw them flirting, having fun.
And do you remember where you were on August 18th of 2017?
I do. Yeah, I was actually at the park. I think from about 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. that day.
Did you see Kara and Don that day?
I did. I saw them both during that day.
Mr. Kuang, did you notice anything unusual about their relationship on August 18th?
No. No. To me, they seemed like they normally did.
Well, Mr. Kuang, I want to ask you about something else. Do you know of anybody else who would frequently come to the park?
Well, I had seen Mr. Clark's ex-wife, Lisa, a couple of times there.
How would you describe that?
Those conversations were a lot more hostile than the other ones. One time the police even were called when Lisa was shouting at Don at the park.
What was Don's ex-wife shouting at him?
She said, "I will wipe you off the face of the earth."
Objection, Your Honor. Under Rule 404, this is improper character evidence.
Response?
Yes, Your Honor. We are allowed to use this to prove something else other than propensity. Now, in this case, we're showing intent.
Response?
Your Honor, this doesn't fit that 404B2 exception. They're using this evidence to show that Miss Clark had been aggressive towards Mr. Clark in the past, so to suggest that's what he did in this case. They're using it for propensity purposes, Your Honor. It doesn't fit that 404B2 exception.
May I respond?
Yes.
We're absolutely not using it for propensity purposes, and in the rules that you can use it for other purposes, such as intent. Now, when you look at the language of the statement itself, it says, "I will wipe you off the face of the earth." It doesn't get more intent than that.
I'm going to overrule the objection.
Yes, Your Honor.
What was Lisa Clark screaming at Don?
Well, she screamed, "I will wipe you off the face of the earth."
And Mr. Kuang, I want to shift gears. I want to talk about the FBI investigation.
Sure.
When did it begin?
Well, the first time I saw them there was August 26th, 2017. I had taken a trip to Mexico for about a week. So when I got back, they were there.
When you saw them there, did you talk to them?
I mean, barely. I mean, they barely asked me anything.
How much footage did you have when the FBI came to investigate?
In total, we probably had over 2,000 hours of footage.
Well, did the FBI ever ask to see that footage?
No, they never did.
Did the FBI ever ask you any questions about that footage?
No, ma'am, they never asked about it.
Did you see the FBI investigating anything else at the park?
I did, yeah. I had saw them investigating the syringes too.
Can you tell us more about that?
Yeah, so the elephant park has syringes full of elephant tranquilizer in case they need to use them on the elephants. They're kept in a locked shed on the property, and so far as I know, I think maybe 12 people have the key, something like that.
Objection, Your Honor. Lack of foundation.
May I respond?
I'm going to sustain the objection.
Move to strike, Your Honor.
Let's see if Ms. Gaskins will lay the foundation.
Yes, Your Honor.
And Mr. Kuang, have you ever seen anybody go into that shed?
I've seen people use the tranks before, yeah.
How many people have you seen go into that shed?
In total, I think 12.
Now, Mr. Kuang, I want to really focus on Don Clark for a moment. Did you get to know him well while you were working at the park?
I did, yeah. Mr. Clark and I spent a decent amount of time together while I was working there.
What'd you learn about him?
Well, the times we spent most together were whenever he would take me up in his plane. We would talk about everything. And he told me how he actually went to Costa Rica sometimes too. He had a house there.
Objection, Your Honor. Hearsay to the statements by Mr. Don Clark.
May I respond?
Yes.
We're also not offering these statements for the truth of the matter. Rather, we're offering them to prove the effect on the listener. May I make an offer of proof?
Yes.
After this witness hears about Don Clark having a property in Costa Rica, this witness then goes to Costa Rica to that property to further investigate.
Ms. Mehta?
Yes, Your Honor. First of all, if that's what this statement is being used for, we don't believe that's enough foundation to actually make that future, to make that proffer that Ms. Gaskins just offered. Your Honor, if she was only told that Mr. Clark owned a property, that's not enough foundation to suggest that he actually knew where that property was and went to the right place. They can't be using it for that purpose because it's not enough foundation to actually be used for that reason.
May I respond?
Yes, but before you do, I'm confused. I thought we heard earlier testimony that Mr. Clark owned vacation property in Costa Rica. Am I incorrect?
You're not incorrect.
Okay. So if that's the case, I guess I'll ask Ms. Mehta, if we already have on the record undisputed testimony that the alleged victim owned property in Costa Rica, what is the harm in hearing this statement?
Yes, Your Honor. The statement that I initially objected to was that he's going to Costa Rica frequently, the first part of what the witness said. It is on the record that Mr. Clark owned a property. However, how this witness knows that and what he knows specifically about that property is important, which is why I objected, Your Honor.
Last word, Ms. Gaskins.
Well, Your Honor, we're not dealing with the foundational issue. Ms. Mehta objected to hearsay. And my response to that is that we're not offering it for the truth because we're not. And as Your Honor previously stated, this is already on the record. We're not concerned with the truth of it. Rather, a couple questions in the future, we're going to ask this witness about his trip to Costa Rica.
Okay, I'm going to sustain the objection. I think Ms. Mehta draws a fair distinction between ownership of the property and a plan to visit that property. And on the basis of that, given that there's no exception cited, you can still ask this witness what he did, but the statement's out.
Did you ever, in Your Honor?
Yes, our jury of lay jurors will disregard.
Did you ever go to Don Clark's property in Costa Rica?
I did. Yeah, I've been there before.
Your Honor, at this time I would object to lack of foundation. We know that Mr. Clark owned a property. This witness is testifying he went to Costa Rica, but we haven't heard that he actually knows the address of that property, that he actually knows the place that he went was in fact Mr. Clark's property. We haven't heard that foundation, Your Honor, and we have a good faith basis to believe that foundation doesn't exist.
Okay. Well, I'm going to give the defense some leeway to lay that foundation. but I'm sure that Ms. Gaskins will lay a foundation there before we get any substantive information on the record. You can proceed.
Did you know Don Clark's address to his home in Costa Rica?
I did. It was in Hermosa Beach.
Did you ever go to that property?
Yes, ma'am.
What happened when you got there?
Well, when I got there, I was looking to see if I could find Don. So I kind of snuck inside of the house to see what was there.
When you snuck into the house, what did you see?
Well, the lights were off, but there was a fan running overhead. And then I saw some clothes in the closet that I actually recognized as Don's. And there wasn't a speck of dust anywhere.
Now, I want to be very clear. When did you go to Don's property?
That was June of 2018.
Why were you there?
I wanted to see if I could find him.
Now, Mr. Kuang, I want to ask you some questions about what's already in evidence as Exhibit 21. Mr. Hudson, can you put that up on the screen for us? Mr. Kuang, are you familiar with this document?
I am, yeah, these are some, or actually, I don't believe I've seen this before.
Have you seen it before you came to trial today?
Yeah, ma'am, I don't believe I was shown this before.
Are you sure about that?
I don't think so, ma'am.
All right, Mr. Kuang. We'll talk about something else. Were you aware of what Don Clark was doing at 6:00 p.m. on August 18th?
I was actually with him then, yeah.
What happened when you were with him?
Well, when I was with him, we were talking, and he was looking at his phone, and then he turned just sort of sheet white, and then walked out of the room right away.
Well, I want to ask you about why that might be. Mr. Hudson, I want you to put Exhibit 21 back on the screen. It's already in evidence. And Mr. Kuang, I'm going to ask you to focus on the fourth phone call on this document.
Sure.
Can you tell us what this says?
It says that on August 18th, Mr. Clark got a call, or placed a call at 6 p.m. To an unlisted number in Costa Rica.
Thank you. No further questions.
Hi, Mr. Kuang. I'm going to be asking you some questions today. Can you see and hear me okay?
I can, ma'am, yes.
Now, sir, I want to start by talking about Don and Kara Bassett's relationship. You testified just a minute ago that they had a healthy, loving relationship. Is that right?
Yes, ma'am, that's right.
Sir, you'd actually seen the two of them fight before, right?
A few times, yeah, I had seen that.
That's right, you'd seen them fight several times. Is that right?
Yes, that's right.
Including the summer that Mr. Clark disappeared, yes?
That's right, I did see them fight in 2017, yeah.
Well, sir, you know that during those fights, Miss Bassett would say that she was upset with how the elephant park was being handled. Is that right? Be turned into a sanctuary instead of a zoo. Do I have that right?
That was what she said. Yeah, she thought it would be kinder to the elephants.
Well, sir, you actually witnessed one of those fights in particular during July or August of 2017, right?
That's right. That was the one where Kara threw a vase at Don.
That's right, sir. You watched as Miss Bassett picked up a vase and threw it against the wall. Is that right?
That's right. The vase missed Don, of course. It smashed against the wall. But yes.
That was during an argument about the sanctuary, right?
Yes, ma'am. That's right.
Oh, sir, Ms. Gaskins just asked you some questions about the trip you took to Costa Rica. I want to ask you a few more about that. Now, you told us you visited Mr. Clark's property in Costa Rica. Is that right?
Yes, I did.
You snuck in the window and went into the house, right?
That's right. I was looking to see if I could find Don anywhere.
Well, sir, when you looked, you realized all the lights were off, right?
That's right.
There wasn't any food in the fridge, was there?
That's right, there wasn't.
You didn't see any toiletries or personal items, right?
Right, ma'am. The only personal items I saw were the clothes.
Well, sir, for the entire week that you were in Costa Rica, you didn't see a single person leave that house, did you?
Right, no one left it.
For that entire week, you didn't see a single person enter that house. Is that right?
That's right, yeah.
Now, sir, Ms. Gaskins also asked you about someone named Lisa Clark. You know who that is, don't you?
I do.
Now, sir, I'm going to show you those phone records that you were just talking to Ms. Gaskins about. Sir, could you put those, Mr. Castleberry, could we get those on the screen? Now, sir, those are the phone records that you talked to Ms. Gaskins about, right?
Yes, they are.
And you were shown these records during your 64 minutes interview, right?
Ma'am, I didn't recognize these. I'm not sure whether I was shown them.
Well, sir, like you did tell us, you just spoke about these with Ms. Gaskins, yes?
That's right, she did.
Now, the call is made by someone named Lisa Clark. Mr. Castleberry, if you would. Sir, you see here that Lisa Clark called Mr. Clark on August 20th.
That's what it says here, yeah.
That's a few days after he disappeared, right?
That's right.
She called him again on the 28th.
That's the 23rd, but yes.
23rd, excuse me. She called him again on the 23rd.
That's right, yeah.
She sent him a text message later, right?
That's what it says there, yeah.
It says, "Why aren't you picking up my calls?"
That's what the text says. If you don't call me back, I will kill you in court.
Well, sir, she even texted Miss Bassett, right?
That's what this says, yes.
She said, "Please tell our husband to call me back," right?
That's what it says.
Sir, all of these phone calls, all these text messages, they were made after Mr. Clark disappeared. Is that right?
Right, these were all after the 18th.
Sir, I want to compare that to how Miss Bassett acted after her husband disappeared.
Okay.
Now, sir, after Miss Bassett disappeared, you didn't stop filming for that documentary, did you?
No, we kept filming it.
The defendant never told you anything like, "I don't think I should film anymore now that my husband is missing," did she?
No, actually, Kara wanted us to keep filming.
And sir, you continued to interview the defendant, didn't you?
That's right, we did.
You're familiar with Exhibit 39 in this case, aren't you?
Yes, I am.
That's film you took of the defendant after Mr. Clark went missing, right?
That's right.
Your Honor, at this time, we offer Exhibit 39 into evidence.
Any objections?
No objection, Your Honor.
Exhibit 39, Ms. Mehta?
Yes, Your Honor.
That'll be admitted.
Mr. Castleberry, could you on the screen and go ahead and play it for us?
My husband is gone. It's been more than a week. He hasn't called or texted or anything. I don't know where he's at, and I'm really worried about him.
Sir, this video was filmed on August 27th, is that right?
Yes, ma'am, I believe so.
The defendant told you she didn't know where her husband was. He hadn't called or texted, is that right?
That's right, that's what she said.
If we could get those phone records back on the screen. Well, sir, you actually know that Miss Bassett never called her husband, right?
That's what this says, yeah.
Miss Bassett never texted her husband, right?
Again, I don't know, but that's what this says.
Well, sir, during your interview with 64 minutes, they asked you about this in particular, didn't they? About how Miss Bassett hadn't called or texted her husband.
They did ask me
the week between when Mr. Clark disappeared and when these phone records end. There's no record that Miss Bassett ever called or texted her husband. Do I have that right?
Objection asked and answered.
This is the last question on the topic.
Yes, Your Honor. Sir, do I have that right? That in that week-long period, Miss Bassett never called or texted her husband?
That's what this record says.
Thank you, sir. Your Honor, nothing further at this time.
Ms. Gaskins, do you have any further questions for Mr. Kuang?
Yes, Your Honor.
Go ahead.
Mr. Hudson, can you put back up on the screen Exhibit 21 for us? Mr. Kuang, I want to focus on the text messages from Costa Rica. Can you see those okay?
Yes, I can.
When were these sent?
6 p.m. on August 18th, 2017.
And based on what you can see from the phone records, did this person from Costa Rica ever contact Don after the day that he went missing?
No, ma'am, I don't believe so.
Thank you.
No recross, Your Honor.
Thank you very much. Mr. Kuang, you're excused. Ms. Gaskins, anyone else?
Yes, Your Honor. At this time, we call Kara Bassett to the stand.
You can proceed.
Good afternoon. Could you please introduce yourself to the members of the jury? I think you're on mute, Ms. Bassett.
Good afternoon. My name is Kara Bassett.
What do you do for a living? Ms. Bassett, I think you're on mute again.
Apologies, I got kicked off of Zoom, but I think I'm back now and I'm ready to go.
What do you do for a living, Ms. Bassett?
I am the proud owner of the Baby Elephant Sanctuary right outside of Tallahassee.
Can you tell us more about your sanctuary?
Sure. Our sanctuary is a beautiful place where we save and rescue baby elephants who have been orphaned or baby elephants who have been injured so they can live out the rest of their life in peace with their fellow elephants.
How did you get involved in doing that?
So I started this with my first husband, Don. We bonded over our love for elephants. And when I first met Don, I told him it was my dream to own an elephant sanctuary, and we created and built it together. Before it was the sanctuary, it was the Greater Tallahassee Elephant Park.
What was your relationship like with Don Clark?
So Don Clark was my first husband. We met in 2009, and my relationship with him was loving. We had a wonderful marriage, and you know, our love for elephants was really something special that brought us together.
Ms. Bassett, do you know why you're here today?
I do. I know that I'm being accused of killing my husband.
Did you do it?
No, I did not kill Don. I loved him very much, and I would never have done that.
Did you hear Ms. Mehta in her opening statement when she said that you planned to kill your husband?
I heard her say that, but that's not true.
Did you hear Ms. Mehta in her opening statement when she said that you poisoned your husband with elephant tranquilizer?
I heard that too, but I did not. I would never have done that to Don.
What about when Ms. Mehta said that you profited off of his death? What's your take on that?
I felt pain. I wouldn't say that I profited. I mean, I now own the elephant park, and some people might consider that, but in comparison to losing the person you love, doesn't compare.
I want to talk about what happened the day that your husband disappeared. What were you doing on August 18th, 2017?
So August 18th was the day that Don went missing. I woke up that morning and he wasn't in bed next to me. I woke up pretty early when the sun comes up. It's usually when I wake up. He wasn't in bed next to me, and it didn't look like he had slept in bed either. I saw him the night before when I said goodnight to him, and he was in the living room, but it didn't look like he came to bed. And I remember that his wallet and his phone was missing. His keys weren't there, and the van that we sometimes use around the park was gone. So I figured that he was out.
Well, let me ask you, do you drive his van?
I have before. It's a van that we use for the park, but I also have a Mini Cooper, so that's my main mode of transportation. The van is more something we use for the park.
Did you drive that van the night that your husband disappeared?
I did not. No, I was sleeping. The last time I saw Don, I said goodnight to him in the living room, and he was watching TV, and I went to bed. That was the last time I saw him.
Miss Bassett, when you woke up, why didn't you call the police?
So at first, I didn't think anything was wrong because I got a text message from Don. It was from the night before, but I saw it that morning. It said that he was going out for a while. So that's what I thought had happened.
Mr. Hudson, can you put that text message on the screen for us? Miss Bassett, is this the text message that you were referring to?
Yes, he sent it late that night when I was already in bed, but I saw it in the morning.
What time did your husband send this message to you?
That was at 11:14 p.m. on the 18th.
And when did you end up calling the police?
So I didn't end up calling the police until about a week later. I believe it was August 25th when I called the police.
Has Don ever just left like this in the past?
Yeah, I mean, he will go out to his favorite spots, to the casino sometimes. He likes that. He would go out to his favorite bar. He has a vacation home in Costa Rica, so sometimes he would take trips there. So it wasn't unusual for him to go places by himself, no.
Well, you mentioned some of his favorite spots. Did you ever go looking for him?
I did. So, you know, I got that text message, so I thought everything was fine. But then I didn't hear from him, and he didn't come back. So I started to get more worried at that point, and I started to look for him.
Where did you look?
So I tried all of his favorite spots. I went first to the casino in Tallahassee. I went to some of the local bars that I know are his favorite places to meet with friends and grab a drink. He wasn't there. And then I tried the airport. You see, he has a plane and a pilot's license. So I thought maybe he had flown to Costa Rica. So I checked the airport too.
Ms. Bassett, did you tell the FBI and the government about the steps that you took to look for your husband?
I did, yeah. I mean, they interviewed me a lot, and I told them that I looked for him. I told them that when I went to the airport, I saw our van was there. So I just kind of thought at that point he was in Costa Rica. That would have been 3 days after he disappeared.
When you told the FBI that you had went looking for your husband at his favorite spots, how did they respond?
They didn't really seem interested in hearing what I had to say. And they did.
Your Honor, speculation that they didn't seem interested in what she had to say.
Sustained.
Move to strike, Your Honor.
I apologize. I'm going to change our ruling. I'm going to overrule the objection. I think as phrased, that testimony is fine.
Yes, Your Honor.
How did the FBI respond?
They didn't seem interested in what I had to say. And at the time, they were investigating his disappearance, and it didn't seem like it was important to them.
Thank you. No further questions.
Cross-examination, Your Honor.
Yes.
Ms. Bassett, I'm going to be asking you some questions today. Before I start, can you see and hear me all right?
Yes, I can.
Ma'am, I want to start by talking about the elephant park you mentioned on direct examination. Now, back in 2017, Don Clark, your husband, owned the elephant park. Is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
Ma'am, you wanted that elephant park to be a sanctuary. Is that right?
I did. It was something that Don and I discussed frequently. I wanted to transition it to the sanctuary it is today.
Ma'am, you thought it was cruel the way Don was keeping the elephants. That's what you told the police, right?
Well, the way we were keeping the elephants, I was part of it at that time, and I didn't think it was right. I thought those elephants deserved better.
Ma'am, I know you're telling us today that you were part of it, but I want to be clear. Mr. Clark owned the elephant park. Is that right?
Yes, I mean, we were married and we ran it together.
And is that a yes to my question? Mr. Clark owned the park?
Yes, he owned the park and we ran that park together. We worked very hard to build that park.
Ma'am, you're actually familiar with Mr. Clark's power of attorney, aren't you?
I am, yes.
Mr. Castleberry, could we put that on the screen? Ma'am, this is that document, isn't it?
Yes, Don gave me power of attorney.
Ms. Bassett, are you still with us?
Yes, I am. Can you hear me?
Yes, I think the audio is a little bit muddled, but we can hear you.
I will speak up.
So, ma'am, this document said that if Mr. Clark were to disappear, you would gain power of attorney powers. Is that right?
Yes. When we went to change this, Don wanted to include that disappearance clause.
Well, that meant you would get control over his properties, right?
That's correct. That's my understanding of what power of attorney is.
You'd get control of his assets, right?
Yes.
And ma'am, you did actually exercise that power of attorney, didn't you?
I did. A year after Don went missing, I exercised this power of attorney.
Well, ma'am, actually, you exercised the power of attorney just months after he went missing. Isn't that right?
Yes, that's correct. I apologize. We had him declared deceased a year after, but I did exercise the power of attorney before that.
Just months after he went missing, you turned that elephant park into a sanctuary like you had always wanted. Is that right?
I did. I felt like it was the right thing to do for the elephants, and it was something that Don and I had discussed.
Ma'am, you've been sitting in trial all day today, right?
Yes, I have been.
You heard testimony about the elephant tranquilizers that are kept at the elephant park, right?
Yes, I did.
Mr. Clark, could you put the, excuse me, Mr. Castleberry, could you put the records on for us on the screen? Ma'am, this is the log that was used to track how much elephant tranquilizer was on the property. Is that right?
Yes.
Could we focus in on that last rectangle, Mr. Castleberry, the very last entry in the log? Ma'am, this entry was made on August 1st, 2017, right?
Yes.
That's the same month that your husband went missing, right?
Yes.
It's signed out by CC. Is that right?
Yes, that's me. My name was Kara Clark at the time.
So, ma'am, to be clear, the very last person who signed out tranquilizer, according to the log, well, that was you. Is that right?
Yes, we would use that for the elephants.
Ma'am, you know how dangerous this tranquilizer can be. Isn't that right?
Oh, yes.
You know that it's 5,000 times more lethal than heroin, right?
Yes, you need a strong tranquilizer to knock out an elephant.
And just a few drops of this drug can kill a person. Is that right?
Yes, that's why you have to be very careful when you're using it.
Ma'am, on August 17th, you knew how dangerous this drug was, didn't you?
Yes.
On August 17th, you had access to where this drug was stored. Is that right?
Yes, we stored it on the park. I was one of the people who had access.
Ma'am, I want to go ahead and talk about the day of August 18th in particular. Ma'am, you told us you stayed in the entire night. Is that right?
I'm not sure what you mean. I mean, I was out and about earlier that day, but I went to bed around 9 and then I woke up in the morning.
On the night of August 18th, it's your testimony that you were at home the entire night. Do I have that right?
Yes, I was. I went to bed at 9 and I woke up the next morning.
Mr. Castleberry, could we get the timeline back on the screen? Ma'am, you've been sitting in trial all day today, right?
Yes.
You heard that a van owned by the elephant park was driven to a swamp, right?
Yes.
You heard that it was driven to an airplane, right?
To the airport, yes.
And ma'am, you heard the FBI agent who testified say that they found matching algae from the swamp on your shoes. Is that right?
I heard that, yes.
Ma'am, you're claiming today that you had nothing to do with this that night. Is that right?
That is the truth. I did not kill my husband, and I don't know why our van was at the swamp. I've never been there before.
Ma'am, I want to talk about what you did after this night. Ms. Bassett, you didn't call the police on August 19th, did you?
No, I called them on the 25th.
You told the police that you first started to get worried on Monday, August 21st. Is that right?
Yes. I mean, at first I wasn't worried because of the text message, but then after a day or two, I did start to get worried.
Ma'am, I want to be clear. You didn't call your husband on August 21st when you started to get worried like you claim?
No, I went and looked for him.
You didn't call your husband on August 22nd, did you?
No, I was looking for him.
Ma'am, it's your testimony that you got in your car and drove around the state of Florida before you picked up your phone to call your husband?
Yes, I went to all of his favorite spots. I went to the casino, I went to the bars that he frequents, and then when I eventually went to the airport, I saw the van was there, and that made me think that he drove the van there to go to Costa Rica.
Ma'am, you ended up calling the police on August 25th, is that right?
I did, yes.
On August 25th, you still had not called your husband, who you hadn't seen in a week, like you claim, right?
That's correct.
Still had not texted your husband, is that right?
No.
Thank you, Ms. Bassett. Your Honor, I have nothing further.
Spence?
No redirect, Your Honor.
Thank you, Ms. Bassett. You can step down. Can we get a time check, please, from our second chairs?
Yes, I believe Sonali has.
You want to just tell me in the chat? Okay, Ms. Mehta, you have 11:30, and Ms. Gaskins, you have 7:30. That's confirmed by both of your second chairs. We're going to proceed straight to closing arguments.
Yes, Your Honor. Poisoned. She profited. Members of the jury, I want to start by reminding you why we're all here today. We're here because of a man named Don Clark. When Mr. Clark died, he lost the chance to see his children grow old. He lost the chance of his grandchildren. He's missed countless weddings and birthdays and anniversaries. We can't bring Mr. Clark back. But what we can do in a court of law is give his family justice. We can do that by holding his murderer accountable. See, that's why we've charged the defendant, Kara Bassett, with murder. It was our job to prove to you beyond any reasonable doubt that Miss Bassett intentionally killed her husband. And members of the jury, we've met that burden today by showing you how the defendant planned for this crime, how she poisoned her husband and then profited off of his death. I want to walk you through all the evidence you heard today, starting with that plan. And members of the jury, the defense's own witness, and Mr. Kuang testified, and he told you he's seen the defendant and Mr. Clark fight multiple times, have angry fights about the elephant park. See, Mr. Clark was in control of that park. Miss Bassett didn't get to make the decisions. She wanted it to be a sanctuary. She didn't agree with what he was doing. She thought it was cruel and wrong. You saw that power of attorney document today, signed just months before Mr. Clark disappeared. You saw that that document said, if Mr. Clark were to disappear, Miss Bassett, the defendant, would get everything. Control over all of those properties, all of those businesses, every cent of that $8 million fortune. So with the plan in place, you learned how the defendant made her husband disappear. We told you today about this dangerous poison carfentanil that was stored on the property. Members of the jury, remember what Agent Johnson told you? There were supposed to be 24 vials of that chemical, but when he searched, he only found 23. And remember, who was the last person to sign out a vial of that poison? Well, members of the jury, we showed you that was the defendant. And remember, the police even asked her, did you know? Did you know how dangerous this chemical can be for a human being? In response, the defendant laughed. We showed you what the defendant had to do so she wouldn't get caught. Remember what happened on the night of August 18th. The defendant drove the family van to a swamp more than 100 miles away and dumped Mr. Clark's body in that swamp. And members of the jury, we know that's what happened because we showed you the GPS records proving that it did. We know that's what happened because we showed you the forensic evidence. Miss Bassett had the same sort of algae that was in the van, that was at the swamp, that was on her boots. And members of the jury, that last part was simple. All the defendant had to do was sit back and profit. After Mr. Clark disappeared, she gained every cent of his fortune and took control of that elephant park like she had always wanted. Now, members of the jury, if you have any doubt left that Miss Bassett is the person who committed this crime, I want you to think about what she did in the week when she claims her husband was missing. Think for a moment about what someone would really do if they were in that situation. If a loved one, their spouse, hadn't been heard from in a week. Would they call them? Would they text them? Would they leave a voicemail? Would they call family and friends to find out where they were? Would they call the police? Members of the jury, in that week, Ms. Bassett didn't do any of those things. She came up here today and tried to tell you that, well, she got in her car, she drove to bars and casinos. Members of the jury, she had an iPhone in her hand. If that was true, if she was driving to bars and casinos, desperately trying to search for her husband, why wasn't the first thing she did picked up that phone and called him? She didn't call her husband because she knew he wouldn't answer. She didn't text to see where he was because she knew exactly where he was. She didn't ask if he was okay because she knew he wasn't. Members of the jury, today the defense tried to tell you a different story. They told you about someone named Lisa Clark, and it's true. Lisa Clark and Mr. Clark didn't like each other very much. But remember, in the week after Mr. called him, she texted him. They may not have liked each other, but Miss Clark was legitimately trying to find Mr. Clark that week, unlike the defendant. Well, then they told you maybe he went to Costa Rica, but remember, he owned a private plane that in the past he had flown to Costa Rica. Members of the jury, the police didn't find that plane in Costa Rica. They found it at the airport. Members of the jury, those things aren't reasonable explanations of the facts. That's the story of a defendant desperate to stay out of prison. Now, we all want to believe that a wife wouldn't do something like this to a husband for money. We all want to believe that a wife wouldn't commit this heinous. Members of the jury, Today's trial just isn't about what we want to believe. It's not about what we want to think happened. It's about what did happen. And what happened is she planned, she poisoned, she profited. That's murder. Find her guilty. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Mehta. Ms. Gaskins, you can proceed.
May it please the court. Planned, poisoned, profited, that's not murder. That's just a catchy phrase with some alliteration in there that doesn't actually prove anything. You see, Ms. Mehta, she's been trying to convince you all day over and over again that for one, Don Clark is dead. And that too, Kara Bassett killed her own husband with some elephant tranquilizer. Now she can say it as many times as she wants. It doesn't mean that she proved it. It doesn't mean that that's beyond a reasonable doubt, and it surely doesn't make it sound any less absurd. You see, when you really think about it, ask yourself, has Ms. Mehta really proven that Don Clark is dead? Is it possible that he could still be in Costa Rica right now as we're speaking? Yes. You see, what really happened is the government, they chose their answer before they asked the questions. Now, when the government walked into the courtroom today, they were the ones who decided to accuse Ms. Bassett of killing her own husband. And that's why the law required them to prove it beyond a reasonable doubt. So what we're going to do is we're going to walk through all of the ways that the government and Ms. Mehta failed to meet that burden. First, we're going to talk about how Ms. Bassett didn't commit this crime and how the evidence doesn't suggest that she did. Second, we're going to talk about those alternate possibilities that I told you about in an opening statement. Why didn't the government investigate anyone else? And third, we're going to walk through the holes in the FBI's investigation. So first, how Ms. Bassett didn't commit this crime. You see, it was the government's burden and their burden alone to prove to you that Ms. Bassett intentionally and deliberately killed Don Clark. But think about it. Out of all the testimony that you heard today, all the witness statements, nobody told you that Ms. Bassett was ever violent with her husband the day he disappeared. Nobody told you that she was ever mad at him, that they argued. Nobody ever told you that they saw Ms. Bassett get in that van that Ms. Mehta claims is so important. Nobody told you that they saw Ms. Bassett wear those boots that Ms. Mehta is basing her entire case on. And speaking of those boots, let's talk about them. Because there's something that Ms. Mehta won't even talk about, something that she's hiding from you. Mr. Hudson, please put up that forensics report. She's trying to tie these boots to the swamp to prove that Ms. Bassett was there, but she can't do that. Because the truth of the matter is they didn't even bother to go to her own property, 5,000-acre elephant park, to see if algae could be present there too. Is it possible that that same type of algae was present in the watering holes or the puddles that were on her own property? Yes. And that's reasonable doubt. Not to mention there's no real motive here. You see, Ms. Mehta, she's been telling you all day that this case, it's all about money. That Ms. Bassett just wanted to kill her husband for money because they had a couple of disagreements about how to run the park. But that's a leap in logic. Just because they had disagreements doesn't mean that she's a killer. I mean, think about it. Wives and their husbands fight all the time. If we put wives on trial every time they had a disagreement with their husbands about money, or about how to run the business, we have a backlog in our court system to last the rest of our lives. So when Ms. Mehta asks you to make assumptions like that, when she asks you to make leaps in logic, that's when you have to remember that's not how this works. that's when you have to remember that Miss Bassett has the presumption of innocence. And speaking of unanswered questions, let's talk about the biggest one in this case. One that I mentioned a couple moments ago in the beginning of my closing. Where is Don Clark? I asked you to think about that question in the beginning because if we had the answer, maybe we'd know what really happened to him. But 2 statements later, 3 witnesses later, we don't have a single answer. Here's why that's a problem. There's no body. There's no forensic evidence. There's no autopsy. There's no blood. There's no signs of violence. There's nothing indicating that this man is actually dead. In fact, you have evidence on the record to suggest to you otherwise. Look back at the testimony of Joe Kuang. He took the stand today and told you he went to Costa Rica. After Don disappeared, he looked at his property. And when he looked at his property, what did he find? The fan was on. His clothes were in the closet. You may be asking yourself at this point, well, what did the FBI do about this? Nothing. Absolutely nothing. I mean, let's start with the lead investigator on this case, Steph Johnson. I made sure to ask Steph Johnson on cross-examination the questions that you needed answers to, and you ended up learning about a bunch of other potential suspects that were never even investigated. I mean, let's go down the list. We have people who worked at the park with access to that carfentanil that Ms. Mehta thinks is the murder weapon in this case that they never even bothered to get an alibi for. Lisa Clark, Mr. Hudson, can you throw up those phone records again? We have Lisa Clark, the victim's ex-wife, who you know was scary. She was threatening this man up until his disappearance. I will wipe you off the face of the earth. Contacting this victim the day he disappeared, refuses to participate in the investigation. Ms. Mehta wants you to believe, oh, this person doesn't matter. Yes, she does. It's suspicious. So what did they do about it? Nothing. And Costa Rica. You also know that Don Clark had calls from Costa Rica the day he disappeared, calls that didn't continue after he disappeared. What did the FBI do about that? Oh, that doesn't matter, but it does. Because you still have unanswered questions about what Don Clark was doing in Costa Rica. That's reasonable doubt. So at the end of this trial, after you've reviewed all of the evidence, all of the lack of evidence that the government has, it's clear that the government chose their answer before they asked the questions. So I'm going to ask you to come to the only conclusion supported by the evidence. I'm going to ask you to find Ms. Bassett not guilty of murder. Thank you.
Ms. Mehta, you can proceed with rebuttal.
Yes, Your Honor. Members of the jury, Ms. Gaskins just came up here and told you that we asked you to make some assumptions. Now, I want to address what those were. She told you that it was possible Mr. Clark was living in Costa Rica. She said we asked you to assume that he wasn't. Members of the jury, that's not true. Because think about it. We showed you how Mr. Clark's plane still sitting in the airplane hangar in Tallahassee, Florida, not in Costa Rica. Mr. Kuang, the defense's own witness, went to his property in Costa Rica. There was no food in the fridge, no toiletries in the bathroom, no lights on, no one coming in or out of that property for an entire week. Sure, maybe Mr. Clark swam across the ocean to Costa Rica, but members of the jury, that's just not reasonable. She also talked to you about these 2 possibilities, Lisa Clark and this caller from Costa Rica. Members of the jury, we already talked about Ms. Clark. We showed you those phone records. She was calling, texting, even calling and texting Ms. Bassett, trying to see, where is he? Where is Mr. Clark? Will he text me back? We have court proceedings up. I need to deal with that. Members of the jury, if Miss Clark had really killed her husband, why would she text Miss Bassett? Why would she let his wife know that he was missing? That's not reasonable either. So finally, you heard about this unidentified phone call from we don't know who placed that call. But remember, we do know Mr. Clark never made it to Costa Rica. Members of the jury, a phone call does not make somebody a suspect for murder. Out of everyone you heard about today, there's only one person who had access to that van and the poison. One person who stood to gain $8 million from Mr. Clark's death. It wasn't Lisa Clark. It wasn't that person on the phone. It wasn't an employee. It was the defendant. Find her guilty. Thank you.
Thank you, counsel. I'm going to ask our judges to submit their ballots. Before they do, I won't prejudice our jury. I'll just say that was tremendous. Congratulations on a wonderful final round.